The 8th of November, 2954. I'm on my way to August Dunlow's spaceport in Orison. Recently, SIG added the Roberts Space Industry Polaris to the 3.24.3 persistent test universe in preparation for its appearance in a flight-ready state at the 2954 Intergalactic Aerospace Expo. The Polaris was originally sold on concept in October 2946 as a naval patrol ship and a flagship for militia operations. At the time, it was meant to be a 155-meter-long ship featuring a heavy torpedo load, a hangar for a medium fighter, 7 turrets, and a crew for up to 24 people. It has suffered since then a torturous development history and has taken 8 years to reach flight-ready status. Thankfully, I haven't had to suffer quite that whole time. I pledged for the Polaris in February 2051, cross-chassis upgrading a Dragonfly LN in the UEE 2948 Exploration Pack to the Polaris. Also thankfully, it has remained quite true to the original design concept and appearance, something that has not been uniformly true of all ships sold on concept. It is a little larger, the required crew complement has come down a bit, and the hangar is large enough to house 2 fighters, even 2 heavy fighters if they're a Hurricane or Scorpius, it looks like. The cargo capacity has also increased, though what cargo has changed over the last 8 years. A day that many backers have waited years for has finally come. That's a big ship. Even when it was 166 meters distant, it still loomed large in view. I haven't toggled vehicle entry markers, and to be frank, throughout this walk around I'm kind of looking for an access panel of some kind. The complexity of this ship model is astounding. I don't even want to hazard a guess at the number of entities, polygons, or programmer hours involved in its creation. The gravity of its size impresses me as I walk around it. There's the aft ventral quad S3 turret, operated remotely from the bridge. I personally think quad S4 turrets are more appropriate for this ship's armament, but SIG has decided on quad S3s. I think quad S3s won't give the needed range and firepower, but testing will prove the point one way or another. So we'll wait and see. The dual S6 turret on the chin provides the main non-torpedo firepower for the ship. It is currently locked into a bespoke cannon with only 300 rounds, so it has to be used judiciously. 2 forward dorsal quad S4 turrets, visible at the top of the ship, provide main anti-fighter protection and secondary anti-ship firepower for the Polaris. By default, they are kitted out with 4 laser cannons. 7 size 3 bearing point defense cannons placed on the outer hull provide anti-fighter, anti-missile, and anti-torpedo defense. As I move around to the aft of the ship, I see now that the engines are not attached to the main hull but ride on pylons. So the hull is not a monolithic body. The engines, being separate of course, increases their vulnerability to attack. After half an hour of fruitless search, I toggled the ship entry markers in the game settings and walked out to the ramp access point. And here is my first frustration and disappointment with the Polaris. SIG could have done a better job of this by placing a physical and visible panel on the front landing gear. The ramp takes an appropriate amount of time to deploy, in my opinion. I got frightened a bit that I was standing too close, so I backed up. As I climb up the ramp, the size of the ship becomes more and more apparent. I am dwarfed by the sheer mass of the Polaris as I approach the cargo bay. The cargo bay is spacious. As the ASOP terminal read, 576 SCU of cargo can fit in here. That is 428 SCU containers and one 64 SCU container, theoretically, or some combination of cargo and vehicles, even snub fighters like the Fury. It opens up some exciting possibilities. Forward of the cargo bay and up these stairs is the torpedo rack space. By the design here, looking at the elevator to my right, SIG fully intends to make torpedo loading a requirement. There they are, 28 size 10 torpedoes, the main firepower of the Polaris. Here on the starboard bulkhead is a fuse panel. These, spread throughout the ship, will become an important part of damage control, and keeping a store of these on hand will be crucial for combat operations. The cargo ramp is controlled by means of a handle located next to the cargo bay aperture. As you can see, the ramp takes some time to fully retract. Thankfully, the struts to either side of the ramp are reasonably narrow and do not obstruct the ramp. Anvil could have taken some tips from RSI when they designed the Carrack's ramp struts. RSI is, however, the undisputed master of strut design. About 25 seconds from start to finish, during which, of course, the ship could be airborne. As I cross the cargo bay, I notice the ship's tractor beam. This will make cargo operations more efficient. The control panel is on the starboard bulkhead. I decline to delve into its operation for now, preferring to move aft. The engineering spaces. Right off the bat, I laud the design and the lighting. There is no question that I am in the bowels of the ship and at the center of its power. This room is all very cool, but useless greeblies. Another disappointment that I have with SIG, but let's just appreciate the art a moment. I move aft and up a short flight of stairs, rare in SIG's design, to the engineering stations. There are 3 of these positioned on each outboard side of the engines. I note wryly that these stations do not have seats, and I also note the useless but artistic monitors up high. A missed opportunity, or one that SIG has not capitalized on yet. As I move aft, I can see from here the antimatter reaction chambers, submerged in some liquid. Critics have already spoken on the folly of this design, but it looks wonderful, and evokes a very clear understanding of exactly what this space is about. To the aft is a short corridor to the aft elevator shaft, which traverses the 3 decks of the ship: engineering, hangar, and cargo bay. The deck plan of the ship is still bewildering to me, as the ship clearly has a split-level design all over it. I ride the elevator to the hangar deck, catching a glimpse of an engineering station as I rise through the ship. The hangar deck is a major feature of the Polaris, and one that I am sore tempted to explore right this moment. The corridors on this deck are spacious. It's clear that SIG has learned some lessons from designing other ships and has allocated generous space to avoid collisions between players. Rather than explore the hangar deck, I decide to finish up my inspection of the engineering spaces. Here is another engineering console, probably the chief engineer station, again with no seat. It leads one to wonder how the engineer will fare during maneuvers. Again, I note many monitors displaying useless graphics that serve no purpose. Aft of the chief engineer station is the ship's gravity generator. Interesting visually, but certainly not interactive. There are also engineering stations at what appear to be large power junctions whose function I am sure has yet to be determined. I move forward and climb to the hangar deck. I move around to the port corridor and pass through two hatches. The ship has been compartmentalized like a warship should be. There are no signs here indicating what this room could be. Ah, the medical bay. The ship's doctor at least gets a chair, it seems. Flanking the doctor station are two treatment suites, each with two Tier 2 medical beds. The design is Spartan and has drawn derision from some sensitive souls who require attractive trappings. To me, this screams utilitarianism. I approve. The controls are standard. I lay down on one of the beds and note wryly that a mess hall is not required. One can, in true military fashion, subsist on a diet of sufficient but unfulfilling nutrifluid. These beds would be very handy for the ship's combat air patrol. If their ships are destroyed, they can regenerate here. I consider what functions the ship's doctor might access from their station. Possibly a readout of the life signs and physical condition of all crew members, tools to dispatch medical drones to provide life-saving treatments to injured or ailing crew members. For now, these monitors are blank, and experience has taught me that they will remain blank for a long time. I move forward along the port hangar deck corridor. Here are located two emergency escape pods, presumably for the ship's doctor and chief engineer. Forward of that is a turret access hatch for the port side Quad S3 turret. It takes some time to access the turret, so this must be a consideration for putting the ship into general quarters. The turret protrudes from the port side of the ship and is concealed when not in use. The turret has a somewhat limited field of fire. This is a function of how little it protrudes from the side of the ship. It has already been commented on by many, and others have criticized the existence of a Quad S3 turret on a warship of this size. My opinion is that more is more, but I am also prepared to try to make do with what I am given. 35 shots in the capacitor at baseline is not a deep well of firepower. It takes only 4 seconds to discharge and 10 seconds to recharge, so this will bear scrutiny as to whether it can be deepened through power management. It takes 15 seconds to exit the turret, which will seem like an eternity when seconds are on the line. I move forward to the ship's mess, located forward of the hangar on the port side of the ship. This utilitarian space has come under fire for being insufficiently inviting and quite Spartan. And, to the bewailment of many, no pool table. I find it suitable and appropriate for a ship of war. The food dispensers are as of yet non-functional, which means that the medical bay is the mess hall for the foreseeable future. The markings on the floor are straight military bureaucracy, and markings inside the room indicate what is obvious to anyone who can see. This is the sort of obtuse thinking that a non-military person ascribes to the military. The joke is on SIG, for they didn't think to put a sign on the door outside the ship's mess. I step out into the central corridor serving the forward portion of the ship on the hangar deck. This is plenty wide for two persons to pass by each other without colliding. I move aft toward the hangar. I take a moment to regard this useless display. What wonders could it one day reveal to us? I move on to the crew quarters on the starboard side of the ship on the hangar deck. Several cabins line the narrow hallway inboard and outboard. A second hatchway provides alternatives to get in or out. The cabins themselves are reasonable for a ship of this nature. Double occupancy berths with a small table and washroom. SIG has decided to use the Polaris as a test bed for mirrors, it seems. It is a welcome addition. I exit the crew quarters and return to the central corridor of the hangar deck, then move aft to continue my inspection of the ship. At the forward port and starboard corners of the corridor ringing the hangar are docking ring hatchways. These are also obvious entry points for unwelcome intruders. Thankfully, for anyone to gain uninvited access to the ship, not just one but two hatchways stand in their way, then a climb up through what could be a fatal funnel to reach the ship's interior. The starboard hangar deck corridor is laid out exactly the same as the port side. Turret, and then two escape pods. On the starboard side of the hangar deck is the brig. There are two cells here, each one single occupancy with basic sanitation facilities and a one-way door. Food can be passed through from the outside through a small access port. For a moment I gave thought to these rooms being used as auxiliary quarters for the ship's fighter pilots, but the obvious danger of being locked into the cells advises against that. Finally, the hangar bay. This has been one of the most discussed and theory-crafted parts of the Polaris since the earliest concept schematics. Just eyeballing the space, it appears that 2 medium fighters could fit within the hangar if they are the right ones, and piloted skillfully. The landing deck itself is demarcated by a depression. A bit of overhang seems permissible based on a quick glance at the hangar doors. In the forward corners of the hangar bay are 2 elevators connected to the cargo bay to bring up supplies. These are accessible by panels next to them, and the elevator takes 6 to 8 seconds to rise up into the hangar bay. Fire extinguishers, non-interactive at present, are located on both outboard bulkheads. I am a little confused as to how the hangar bay doors open, or whether the flight deck rises. SIG can be arbitrary about whether they apply physicalized door opening mechanisms or allow F-presses when standing in certain locations. Eventually, I find the door handle. There is one on each outboard bulkhead aft of the outboard hatches. The doors open at a sedate pace, taking about 30 seconds all told to fully retract. Yes, this space will do nicely. Well done, SIG. It looks like all of the design experience and time taken to right-size this ship has paid off. I can see 2 medium or even heavy fighters being landed here, especially wedge-shaped craft like the Hornet or Hurricane. And of course small fighters like the Arrow or snubs like the Fury in quite some number. The height of the hangar bay will allow some larger craft to be tucked in. Some say even a Vulture could be landed here without trouble. Moving forward in the hangar bay, I see that some fuel tanks have been located here on each outboard bulkhead. These are non-interactive, but it is good to see that SIG has made their intentions clear that fueling can be done. I move forward toward the bridge along the central corridor. Forward of the ship's mess and the crew quarters are access hatches to the dorsal quad S4 turrets. These primary turrets are reached by a short corridor, and it takes a considerable amount of time to put them into action. 25 seconds from the outer hatchway to turret powered on. It is immediately apparent that these default loadout cannons at default power settings are not high rate of fire weapons. The capacitors allow only 7 shots, and it takes about 6 seconds to recharge the capacitors. Forward of the Quad S4 turrets is the captain's quarters. No signage indicates this, but I am aware that SIG has locked this door until a future date. Forward of the captain's quarters on the port side of the central corridor is the ship's armory. Within are 10, not 12 suit lockers, 10 long arm, and 20 sidearm racks, but no integrated storage that I was able to find in my cursory inspection. This would seem absolutely necessary for normal away team preparation. I took a moment to inspect the lighting panel, which offers 3 lighting options. The lighting panels are a nice touch. It shows SIG's evolving design refinement. The main elevator is across from the ship's armory. It proves a little frustrating to use. And as you can see, it is not exactly fast either. Ah, okay. Here are the torpedo racks. Ah, torpedo control. So, the room itself isn't much to look upon, and the station has been much maligned. Well, this will bear greater scrutiny later on, but I imagine that this station, crucial to the ship at forcing the torpedo officer to stand, has a remote turret integrated and relies on coordination with the pilot to get a lock. More to follow in use. Forward of torpedo control is the ship's secondary weapon, dual size 6 ballistic cannons. There are fuses on the sidewall, implying that they might require attention in battle. It takes a moment to get into the gunner seat, so, like all turrets, this must be taken into consideration. Well, that's a little frustrating. The firing arc on this turret is decent given its position. It's not going to be delivering parting shots at pursuers, but the cannons can reach any reasonably positioned targets to the front or side of the ship. If the pilot is unable to keep the nose slightly ahead of the target, the gunner will have some trouble getting a firing solution. The weapons themselves don't make a satisfying noise upon being fired, and I think that this will be corrected soon enough. Perhaps even some sonic vibration effects added. Like all crewed turrets, this one takes some time to get out of, so it's important to plan for it in the case of evacuating ship. I return to the main elevator, which again proves a bit cantankerous. The slowness of this elevator will be a problem sooner or later, I am morally certain. It takes damn near a minute, maybe 30 seconds if the call elevator button starts working on the first try, to move from sub-level 1 to level 1. I suspect that this has something to do with separating torpedo control from the bridge, which, fine, whatever. SIG is likely to change this in the future at some point. Just imagine staring at this wall while a ship is disabled in combat as you're trying to get to the escape pods. Talk about unpleasant. Speaking of which, 8 escape pods line the central corridor just aft of the bridge. 5 for the bridge crew, 2 for the 2 torpedo officers, and 1 for the dual S6 gunner, if those crew members can make it in time. Finally, the bridge. Look at all those useless monitors. Forward of the non-functional holotable is the flight deck, which has 5 crew stations flanked by more decorative monitors that serve no purpose. Yet. Perhaps forever. If it sounds like I'm harping on this topic, I am. One of the reasons I've been willing to part with the money I have has been SIG's attention to detail. Adding decorative elements that serve no purpose belies that attention to detail. Drawers that don't open, monitors that serve no purpose, and so on do not impress me. I am not fooled. That said, this is a very handsome flight deck. I occupy the port bridge officer station. Well, that takes some time. Pretty good visibility from a station in the back of the bridge, all things considered. In addition to having the full range of MFDs available, this station controls the aft dorsal missile turret. This turret's ridiculously meager supply of just 12 size 2 missiles has been heaped with scorn by the community even before release, and I agree heartily. The firing arc is pretty good though. This would be the sort of thing a Polaris captain would immediately replace with at least a quad S3 turret, or larger missile bays or something. I take a moment to consider these monitors behind the bridge crew stations. If the rear bridge officers' chairs could roll back and look at these, and if these were to display some kind of useful information, that would be amazing. So I am just going to take a breath and be grateful that SIG has built in the possibility of this at some future date by having these here. Alternately, I suppose a pair of seats could be put here for ship's marines so they could protect the flight deck. I take a moment to return to the holotable room and consider it a bit more. I passed by it too quickly. The holotable is of course non-functional for now and likely for a long while, but what functions it could serve are very much theory-crafted. I personally might wish it was placed immediately in front of the captain's chair so that it could be used in combat. Its placement here suggests it's used in mission planning or scanning. In fact, a label on the deck reads radar. I turn my attention to these panel doors on the outboard bulkheads. Opening the forward of these two doors reveals a decently sized open space for what? Components? Is this for the blades that SIG has promised we might avail ourselves of someday? I wonder what purpose SIG has for this space. As I enter the space and see no means to open it from the inside, my mind wanders to thoughts of NPC ship's marines stuffed in here to be allowed out in case of boarding party. The aft compartment holds a pair of computers by the looks of them. Are these blades already installed visually but not functional yet? The point defense system fire control computers? Who could say? The port side aft compartment is identical, with the addition of a fuse box up high. The port side forward compartment is the same as the starboard side forward compartment. I return to the flight deck. The starboard bridge officer station controls the aft ventral Quad S3 turret. Given the placement of this turret and its responsibility for defending the entire underside of the ship, I might have wished for this to be a Quad S4 turret. But I understand the planned vulnerability that SIG has baked into this ship by this decision, and I suspect that it will change if needed. I take a moment to consider this turret's firing arc. This turret has the same 35-shot capacitor as the port and starboard Quad S3 turrets, not especially deep at default power settings. I poke around at the MFDs a bit. Forward and to the right of the flight deck is the co-pilot station. It takes me a moment to suss out the controls, but I eventually get the ship flight ready. Not that I'm taking this Polaris out into the open on my own. I have too much regard for this ship and what it represents to do that. Some Polaris backers are insistent they intend to solo this ship, and to them I say that they will get what they get. Pretty standard 2 MFD setup here, with some nice movement of HUD elements onto the panel so that the view is uncluttered. While I don't want to take the ship out of the hangar, I am tempted to lift it up off the deck. I checked the general clearance in the hangar. Looks like plenty of room. The ship does feel like it has some weight to it. It responds slowly, especially because the landing gear is down, which is good in this enclosed space. The engines sound powerful but not overbearing, which is nice. And as I said, the ship feels weighty, a bit slow to respond, which I would expect. I take my time sitting her back down. I do feel the gravitas of this ship. Yes, it weighs nothing. It is literally insubstantial, being after all mere digits in a stream of code. But I do feel respect for it. And it's a respect that I've not really felt for other ships, not even the Carrack, which is not terribly much smaller than the Polaris. I linger at the power management MFD. I'm a bit puzzled by 2 power units of 27 remaining with no power to the weapons. But when I power up the weapons, I'm told that the ship has 5 pips allocated to them. There's some hinky math going on here, I think. I scroll on over to the radar and life support and coolers. Maybe the 5 in weapons came from the 2 remaining of the 27 plus 3 drawn from life support. I drop 2 more pips out of coolers, then allocate them to shields and weapons. This takes me a moment to figure out as I'm still grooving my brain into the control systems. I spend some time wondering what the battery indicator means, and then I fiddle around with the MFD controls to confirm that they indeed work. The shields are quadrant shields with 400 units total, allocated 100 per face as you would expect. A face can be reinforced up to 220 units, with the remaining faces dropping to 60 units each. It takes 13 seconds to go from balanced shields to double front. It takes slightly less time, about 12 seconds, to drop back to balanced shields. Oh, this is a pleasant surprise, a remote camera in the hangar? Cameras like this spread throughout the ship would be a really nice feature for sure. And then, because I am who I am, my mind turns to anti-hijack weaponry slave to those cameras. But that will never happen. Pretty much sure. Other than these door controls, no other controls really are available to the co-pilot. It was a surprise to have 2 stations capable of moving the ship. I wonder how handoff happens between the 2 stations. I gotta give this open door button a try. Is this the left ramp? I don't really see anything. Maybe this is an interior door? I'll have to check this out. I peek around at the other buttons, then look around for any buttons I haven't found so far. I move over to the pilot station. The pilot station appears to be a mirror of the co-pilot station. I find it curious that it is off, and that the buttons read engines on when the engines are already on, and so forth. I search in vain for a power on button. I eventually resort to flight ready to activate the station. That is a lot unintuitive, but once learned, I guess it's fine. One thing that I notice immediately is the radar disc is activated from the pilot station. Does this mean that if the pilot is incapacitated or has to be absent, the co-pilot doesn't get one? I suppose that as long as the station's powered up, the radar disc will be visible from the co-pilot station. Lastly, the captain's chair. The view is commanding. RSI design language has come a long way from the strut-heavy Constellation. The struts are still there, but in a much more reasonable manner. I can crane my head around pretty freely to see all around the front of the ship. The glass does not appear as substantial as I thought it would be. I somehow felt certain that SIG would make the armored panes thick and add some chromatic aberration effect to denote their thickness. Not bad at all. The Polaris has been long in the waiting. It promises to be a ship that will support many different styles of play and serve as a mobile base of operations for a small group. I've had to think about it many times whether I want to sit this chair and have this responsibility, because it is a responsibility. Working together to have a fun time requires some effort and some human skill. While I have some reservations that SIG is going to do this justice in the near term, I am impressed with the overall art and effort that went into it. It represents the trust of the backers expressed in the money pledged for the ship and the work of the developers to bring it to fruition within the verse. I think about the years I spent leading virtual organizations in multiplayer Arma 2 and 3 with Shack Tactical, and of course my real life leading troops in the Army. Given a good group of folks, I think we can have many fine adventures aboard and based off this ship. I look forward to seeing this ship mature and its various systems come online in future patches, and having many excellent moments in space with fellow backers. I feel vindicated in having made the pledge I did in February 2021. Though the wait has been long, SIG is delivered, and I am satisfied with my initial inspection.